What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Saturdays in Stores podcast, brought to you as always on the Crossover channel. Saturdays in Stores, but recording this on a Sunday, more than likely going to be coming to you all on a Monday. A lot that went on, transpired in the last few days in the world of UConn basketball. Definitely little some unfortunate stuff to talk about, of course, with just how the team kind of fizzled out in the Big East tournament, which of course I'm going to touch on and break down. But I do think there is a little bit good to take away from this weekend, just in terms of I think UConn probably getting the best possible outcome, which they could have gotten on Selection Sunday, which did just happen 4 hours ago on the night of this recording, March 16th on Sunday. I think the selection committee definitely had UConn's best interest in mind, it seems. I think they probably got the best draw they could have possibly gotten. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into everything that this podcast is going to have, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on this channel, whether it's college basketball or NBA, which I know a lot more of that content's to come with the NBA playoffs coming up fairly soon, please engage with the content any way you can. It really does help, whether it's liking the video, subscribing, commenting what you guys have to say about whatever it is we might be covering, and just telling other people about it. It really does all help with being able to get this content out to more people and really influence YouTube's algorithm to get our videos essentially out to a larger audience. So let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about it. So UConn obviously played in the Big East tournament. First game was on Thursday, my mistake, against Villanova. Game which they were able to win. They won 73-56. And obviously, if you watch the game, you know that final score isn't very indicative of how competitive that game was. Really wasn't until later on in the second half that UConn was really finally able to start consistently knocking down shots. I mean, Alex Karaban just got really hot, being able to run off those screens behind the three-point line and nail a couple threes, big shots, which were definitely needed in the late stretch of that game. They were able to get stops. I give a lot of credit to Alex Karaban, just with how he was able to defend Eric Dixon, who's, again, the leading scorer in the country. I know that's been mentioned numerous times on this podcast. But yeah, I mean, I'd argue. I saw Rob Dostler on Field 68, his Top Dogs podcast. He argues that that was his best half of Alex Karaban's best half of basketball this entire season, and it's tough to argue. He looked really good, and just I don't know that I've seen Alex look that comfortable running off of screens to get off his 3-point shots. I don't know if I've seen him that comfortable doing that more than how he looked doing that on Thursday night against Nova, which again, late tip off. I know I mentioned that last podcast for the Saturdays and Stores. 9:30 tip, obviously ended a little past midnight, but yeah, he looked really comfortable running off those screens and being able to nail those threes. Liam got going towards the late stretch of the game. Samson actually was able to get decent game as well. But really, I think outside of AK, no one really jumped out other than Aiden Mahaney, which was kind of a little surprising. His box score stats don't jump out to you at all. But I think it was really good the minutes he provided off the bench and being a capable ball handler and facilitator. Yeah, I have to say he made some really nice passes. Like uh like one which went to Solo, I believe, coming off a nice dish to the corner. They had one where he drove to the lane and dumped it down to Terrace Reed for a nice finish as well, I believe it was. But yeah, I mean, I think that was definitely a big confidence boosting game, and I think this entire tournament was a solid confidence booster for Aiden Mahaney, a guy who I know I talked about in the early stretch this year. I wanted to believe in continuously that he was going to get to the point that Hurley and this coaching staff had for him when they recruited him out of the portal, but he just never really did it. But I think these two games in the tournament, he played with a lot more confidence and a lot more toughness than we've kind of seen from Aiden a lot this year. There was a point where he missed a three, turned the ball over, and then his head kind of drooped down. It looked like Hurley was bringing in DR to come sub in for him. But then there was a play where AK got a pass, probably could have taken the shot. It wouldn't have been a bad shot, but he made the unselfish play, dished it into the left corner for Aiden, knocked down a three. And then Hurley just let him play it out. He played, and he played well. He played tough. He was able to get out in transition. Once when he got a steal, I want to say might have been off of Eric Dixon, laid it up, went coast to coast. And then another time where he had a really tough left-handed, high off the glass finish, which was a shot with a really high degree of difficulty. So I think that's a huge confidence boosting play. But yeah, I mean, in the game against Creighton, he knocked down two threes, I believe, as well. One coming at the end of the first half as time expired, and then one which is really big three to cut the lead to five. But I'll talk about that more in the Creighton breakdown. But yeah, um, again, that was a good game. I did really think that was UConn continuing to kind of hit their stride the way I talked about. They were kind of hitting it towards the end of the season where they were handedly beating the teams they're supposed to handedly beat, and they obviously got a really close win, which was an important win against Marquette. Um, but yeah, it was a good win. I definitely think that had me feeling really confident going into the game against Creighton, a Creighton team that barely beat DePaul in double OT. Took 30 something points, I forget off the top of my head, from Ryan Kalkbrenner, and again, two OTs, two overtime periods to beat, of course, not very good DePaul program. But you do have to give DePaul a lot of credit for winning the game in the Big East tournament to begin with and keeping it as close as they did with Creighton for as long as they did. But yeah, I pretty much takes care of everything I was able to take away from Nova. Uh, Outside of AK playing really well in that second half, and UConn actually playing really well, good defense on Eric Dixon. They let Wooga Poplar get kind of hot, which they shut him down in the second half, which was really nice to see. It gives me some more hope going into the tournament now when if they do. Um, the likes of a Jeremiah Fears, who could really hurt you with his offensive game. It gives me more hope that they're going to be able to shut guys like that down when it really comes down to needing to be able to do that. But yeah, this game against Creighton, I think, was the big storyline for UConn out of this Big East tournament. They obviously lost 71-62, and realistically, um, this team has to go all in on being a really, really good offensive team. They need to be teams with their offense. They're not a good defensive team at all. They foul a lot. This is stuff that's been redundant on this podcast and across anyone who covers UConn basketball the entire season. They need to bank on being a better offensive team than the team they're playing. Every time they step on the court, and they didn't do that against Creighton. Defensively, they weren't good in the first half. Really, they couldn't stop Jamiya Neal. He was able to get to his right hand, which you can't let him do. You needed to force him left. They didn't do a good job of doing that, and yeah, they let other guys like Jason Green get hot in this game, especially in the second half. They let Jason Green get hot. And yeah, they couldn't get stops. And you're not going to win a game with this roster when Liam McNeely and Alex Karaban are shooting uh, the poor percentage they did. Liam McNeely was 6 for 20 in this game, 0 for 5 from 3. Alex Karaban struggled throughout the whole game, 0 for 3 from distance, 3 for 10 from the floor, just in general. And yeah, you're not going to win games when your best player, Liam McNeely, is not shooting well. And when Alex Karaban, your kind of a second, third option, depending on how you want to look at it, isn't hitting shots as well. Solo Ball, did shoot great in this game either. 2 for 5 from 3, 5 for 9 from the floor. Obviously, you would like to see him knock down a few more threes or get a few more looks off. But yeah, they struggled to get to the line. They only shot 4 free throws as a team in this game. And it's just not a recipe for success against Creighton. And I think a lot of people kind of discounted how good of a team Creighton can be. I think a lot of people, I know UConn was favored in terms of betting wise going into this game. They were a favorite. I want to say it might have been, they opened as a 3.5, maybe 4.5 point favorite. But you have to consider they lost at Gamble Pavilion to Creighton. Granted, they didn't have Liam McNeely in that game. Maybe they would if they had Liam. But when they did have Liam and they played at Omaha, if Liam McNeely doesn't go off for 38 points, you have to remember they were down 16 in that game at one point. If Liam doesn't have the performance he did, then UConn loses by a lot in that game. And I think a lot of people forget that. And this was definitely a tougher matchup that I think a lot of people realized going into this game. And Creighton definitely scared me when I saw that we were going to have to play them after beating Nova. I was really hoping DePaul would have been able to take care of business. I didn't think that was even going to be a possibility, but of course it was. Unfortunately, DePaul couldn't beat Creighton, but it ended up being UConn Creighton, and Creighton won in this game. But I think by far the biggest storyline to come out was at the end where I want to say Creighton was up 7 and they got a steal. They passed it down to Jamiya Neal, who throws down a windmill dunk, which obviously with 4 seconds left, little bit of a lower class type of thing to do. But hey, you win, you deserve the right to talk your talk. I don't agree with scoring when you're up 7 when there's like 4 seconds left in the game. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Like I just mentioned, a lower class thing. I know Hurley mouthed low class, he saw happen. But yeah, so that prompted Hassan Diar to push Neal and pretty much square up essentially against them. That forced some of the players to come in, break it up. The officials came in, broke it up. But yeah, I think I'm totally fine with Hassan doing what he did, where he steps up for his team, his program. You're not going to just flaunt on UConn the way Jamiya Neal did and not hear anything from it for any of the players. And I don't agree with what Jamiya Neal did, but I think with this history between these two programs last year is kind of being a rivalry where Creighton's kind of had UConn's number outside of that game in Omaha this year. I mean, last year at Gamble Pavilion as well. But Greg McDermott is 9-4 in his career against Dan Hurley. I know one of those losses was when Hurley was coaching at URI. But I mean, hey, they've earned the right to talk, and until UConn can beat them in a game that really really matters, then they're going to continue it. And it's unfortunate because Jamiya Neal graduates at the end of this year. Hassan does as well, and it would be really cool to see Creighton come to Gamble Pavilion and see the reaction from the student section, the crowd when Jamiya Neal touches the ball, and how, of course, hectic that could get. But yeah, I mean, again, I have no problem with what Hassan did. I really do respect what he did, stepping up for his team, his program, and doing that. And also another shout goes to Luke Murray as well. He kind of had some words with Greg McDermott in the handshake line where he said, "Hey, I mean that's not the right thing to do. It's low class. That's a low hanging fruit. You don't do that." And of course, Greg McDermott he talked back and everything. But I mean at the end of the day, Greg McDermott he addressed it. He said it was wrong. Jamiya Neal came out and said he was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. And hey, you have to respect someone owning up to up probably something that they shouldn't have done. And Greg McDermott came out and said it too and apologized. So you have to respect that, owning up to your mistakes. But again, they of course this is all prevented if UConn doesn't put themselves in a situation where they lose this game to Creighton in essentially a rivalry game. And it's unfortunate because the opportunity to get that rematch against St. John's in the Garden for the Big East Championship, potentially being able to win that game and get to that 7 seed line rather than the 8-9 where they ended up today. I mean, it could have changed the course of the season. It could have added a lot of momentum, and now there's a lot of uncertainty going into the tournament. But let's get into that a little bit. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning, I think this is probably the best possible outcome UConn could have possibly gotten with the draw that they got during Selection Sunday. So they end up as an 8 seed. They're playing in the Midwest region, I believe, and they're going to be playing in Raleigh, North Carolina, against Oklahoma in the first round on Friday. I believe it's a 9:30 tip, so late tip, which is unfortunate. But I mean, for a first round game, that's probably the best possible match we could have gotten. Oklahoma is pretty good. In terms of, again, the competition they played, it's a lot better than the Big East, but they struggled this year, and really a lot of it falls on a lot of the what they do offensively. That burden falls upon Jeremiah Fears, who's been one of the better freshmen in the country this year, scoring wise. I mean, he got off to a really, really hot start early in the season, looked like one of the best, potentially a top 5 freshmen. He could end up being a lottery pick in this year's draft. He's definitely someone who could pose a lot of problems to UConn in their matchup on Friday. Just with considering how bad of a defensive team this UConn team is, and how just really they struggle against scoring guards like that. I assume Hassan Diar will probably end up getting that matchup or that assignment on defense. But hey, I think that's definitely a game that's more than winnable, and they should win in my eyes. That's a game they should be able to win. Again, of course, you can't guarantee anything with this team, especially games that they should easily win. They didn't win this year, like at Seton Hall, like against Colorado. I mean, you could even make the argument Dayton, but Malcolm was just a recipe for disaster. But yeah, again, this is more than a winnable game. They should be able to win this, hopefully. If they don't, there's obviously the world where Jeremiah Fears or Jalon Moore, I believe his name is, he could hurt them in the post as well, get Terrace Sampson in foul trouble. But yeah, they need to get stops, and they absolutely have to. And they need to show up offensively. They're not going to win that game against Oklahoma if the shooters aren't hitting their shots, which is Liam, AK, and Solo. You have to, I mean, it does worry me a little bit because it's been a while since we've had a game where AK goes for 25, 26. Liam has a really, really good game where he's scoring 20 plus, or Solo where he's making 4 or 5 threes. And, I think that is one thing I kind of hope for, where I've talked about how this team hasn't had a game where everything just clicked. They haven't had that yet this year. So I'm hoping it does come in the tournament. I think Aiden Mahaney playing with more confidence and having better minutes than he's had throughout most of the year, I think is something which also gives me a little bit more hope. Of course, this is a little bit of a team with some turmoil considering the news about 50% of the roster, at least considering, if not knowing, where they're going to end up at the end of the transfer portal cycle. So that's definitely something to continue to watch to see how that affects the team going forward. But if they're able to win that round one matchup against Oklahoma, they would more than likely draw Florida, which I don't see losing to a 16 seed. I don't see a single one seed losing to a 16 this year. But again, I don't think UConn is able to beat a one seed this year. But if you're going to draw one seed, Florida is probably the best one seed to draw. They're a really, really good team, and they more than likely will beat UConn if UConn is able to beat Oklahoma in the first round. But I would say they're probably the weakest one seed in terms of that they don't pressure you defensively, and they're not as physical as the other one seeds like Auburn, Duke, Houston. And they might not be able to overwhelm the UConn guards in backcourt the way those other one seeds would have been able to. Say UConn would have drawn one of them in the second round. So I think you have to look at it optimistically in a way that you kind of got the best possible situation they could have. Granted, the way the season went, of course, you want to get to the 7 seed line. Couldn't happen. Didn't go far enough in the Big East tournament. If you're going to end up as an 8 seed or on the 8-9 line, this was the best possible thing that could have happened. Drawing Oklahoma, a team which, again, playing the SEC, really competitive, but struggled at times, and is definitely a team that UConn is capable of beating. And by the way, I did see a stat. If UConn is able to beat Oklahoma Friday, they would tie that 90s Dynasty Duke team with Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley, Grant Hill for most consecutive NCAA tournament wins. Of course, UConn's won 12 straight, being the back-to-back national champs. If they can win one more, that would bring their win streak to 13 in the tournament, which would tie that Duke 90s era dynasty. So that would be pretty cool, really cool milestone to hopefully be able to achieve as those two programs standing alone in the expanded tournament era. So definitely something I look forward to if that happens. And hey, I think with the way things ended up, if they're able to make it to the second round, I think you have to somewhat consider this. I mean, obviously it's not a success when you had the opportunity to go for 3, but some of that falls on just the staff not being able to construct the roster the way they thought it was going to end up panning out, and just guys not ending up being as far along or as good as they banked on them being. So it's unfortunate. You always want to go for the natty when it's on the table, but this year, let's just be realistic. I do not think it's going to happen, and the way they played against Creighton, if they play like that, it worries me a lot going to the tournament. But again, I think they probably got the best possible outcome which could have happened. And yeah, I mean, later in the week, I might try to make a breakdown episode previewing that matchup more specifically between Oklahoma and UConn. But until then, I think that pretty much covers everything I had to take away from the Big East tournament and Selection Sunday with UConn's draw that they got. But yeah, again, please, as always, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on this channel, do everything you can to engage with our content and our videos. And until the next episode, I'll see you all next time.